This is Matan here. We really enjoyed recording this episode. We've been wanting to do a Sanderson episode for a really long time, but what did end up happening is that the episode got a bit longer than we expected, so we had to split it into two parts. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to have to wait 2 weeks for part two. Probably going to be out in a few days, but for now, please enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durrag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land that this podcast was created on.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Prose and Cons. We are a podcast for writers by writers because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. I'm Ali Burnham, your host, and joining me today is Matan and Elul.
Hello, hello. My name
And
is.
yes, tell us about
Yes,
yourself.
I will. I will
want
tell
more
you
than
about
just your
myself.
name.
I felt compelled
are
to do
you?
so. Yeah. My name is Matan and James. I'm also a writer. I like to write horror and fantasy, and I'm also an English teacher in my spare time. Actually, it's not my spare time if I get paid for it, right?
And also joining us today is James Healy.
Hello, how's it going? I'm James Healy. I'm a writer and editor. I'm known for Cooling Engines, which was published in our first anthology, The New Mythic.
Wonderful. And my context, I'm a screenwriter, I'm a novelist. I'm starting to say that with more confidence these days. And I write comics. You can find the first two issues of Forgotten Rose are available for purchase. That's a diesel punk noir. If you like authoritarian states run, yes, since we're living in a time of uncomfortable political control, maybe this is just the right comic for you. So today we're a really fun topic, one that I'm very excited about. We're doing a deep dive into the man, the myth, Brandon Sanderson himself. You may have heard that Matan and me quite frequently use Brandon Sanderson and his works as references in nearly everything we discuss whenever we're talking spec fic. Brandon Sanderson is the modern touchstone. We have James here as our buffer, our neutral party to stop it when maybe the fandom gets a bit
This
too
is
out
good
of
because me and you
control.
could be like, we could devolve
no,
into
folks,
this, cesspit of admiration, just like talking about how much we love Sanderson for an hour. And James is here to balance us.
Exactly. Exactly.
So explain that for listeners who don't know what these magic terms mean and
Yes.
stuff.
When we start going down any rabbit holes, we've got James to pull us back out. But we'll be talking a little bit about what we know about his career from afar, what we admire about his career, and kind of the context he occupies in the spec fic world. And then in about the second half, we're going to dive into the actual content of his books. I have a recommended reading order for anyone who's been curious about where to start Brandon Sanderson, but have been terrified of his book catalogue. Don't worry, we're here to help you. We're going to give you a recommended reading order. And inspired by Matan, I've also created a game at the end. So, before we dive deeper into Brandon Sanderson, tell me, folks, starting with you, Matan, what have you been reading, watching, listening to lately?
Today's a deep cut. You guys know I'm an English literature student, so I read a bunch of stuff that maybe I normally wouldn't read. In the 17th century, King Charles I was executed. The English Civil War, maybe you guys are familiar. Followed by a republic by Cromwell. Anyway, after King Charles is executed by his own people, this book shows up. It's called the I'm gonna unblur my screen. It's the Icon Basilica, which is basically the autobiography of King Charles I, allegedly written by King Charles I. Spoiler alert, probably not. And Matan, why are you reading this? Well, you see, I don't actually have to, which makes the whole thing even crazier. But I got sucked into it. We were learning about John Milton and Paradise Lost, and I kind of came across this, and here I am reading the last words of allegedly a king destined to be beheaded. Is it interesting, listeners? Yes. Is it an easy read? No. Should you read it? Look, it's really interesting. It's the first time an English king was ever executed by trial. And this king did go on to be treated like a martyr afterwards, so the book did kind of work. And yeah, it's nice. Read widely, guys. That's what I have to say. Yeah.
You never know what you might stumble on.
Can I recommend you a book to read after that, Matan? Robert Harris has a book called Act of Oblivion. I think it has different names in different
Act of
places, but
Oblivion?
I've seen it called Act of Oblivion, and it is essentially about the manhunt for the
The
men
regicide.
who
Yeah,
were
yeah.
involved in the
Oh,
execution
they
of
they
King
they
Charles I. That was
killed them. They
1660s,
really
wasn't it?
killed them. They killed them bad, yeah, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a really good story of the manhunt. It's from the perspective of the guys who are fleeing, and the perspective of kind of like one fictionalized character who is pursuing them, but he is like an amalgamation of all of the various people who were
That
kind of
sounds
involved in it.
awesome.
Nice.
Very good, very good.
And what have you been reading, writing, watching, listening to at the minute, James?
I've been reading the Book of Coley, which is the first book in the Rampart series, which is by M.J. Carey, who is an author I really loved because he wrote the Girl with All the Gifts, which is a book I'm always banging on about, but I never ended up looking up any of the author's other books, so I just ended up looking up what else he's written there in the last couple of weeks. Found this book and checked it out. I'm really enjoying it. It's got a really great voice that the story is told from. It's written from kind of a civilization has collapsed. It's many generations later. There's been kind of believable, I suppose you would say, like constricting of knowledge and constricting of what people are aware of. So the whole book is written in a really old kind of dialect. Everyone says, "Did you know that was going to happen?" And the own lead went this way and stuff. And it just feels really authentic. The character is just bringing you through his life in this village, where anything outside, they go outside the village, everyone just tries to kill them immediately. So it goes along and tells this story really well, and it's quite enjoyable. And then you start to get a sense that something is like kind of a bit sinister in the village, the sense of control that the people who are in charge have. And it starts to bring in technology, and these characters treat technology like the highest magic, but it's kind of because there's been a little bit of a withholding of information and stuff. So really, really good, really well written. Yeah, it's excellent.
Very cool. And for myself, I was initially dragged kicking and screaming into watching Lego's Monkey Kid, but I finally had to eat my words, and I'm actually enjoying it enough to recommend it. So you know how Lego, like the toy, the block, the brick, also has an insane amount of animated media, and they've got their fingers in everything. The Lego Star Wars is hysterical, but also at the same time, it is also just Lego, and that's always been like a hard thing for me to get past. Like it's always either been like parody comedy for kids that sometimes an adult could be like, huh, that was a funny thing for Lego Batman to say. You know, that joke forever. But they've recently released a series called Monkey Kid. And it's working with the Journey to the West and the Journey to the West mythos. And even if, you know, us from a Western context aren't super familiar with the exact beats of Journey to the West, we have seen it, we have consumed it, because Journey to the West is in everything. It has filtered its way through, you know, you could point to like the Iliad on one point of the spectrum that has affected everything forever, and then you point to Journey to the West, which has equally influenced and affected everything forever. We have shonen anime as a genre structure because of Journey to the West. Anyway, what Monkey Kid surprised me with is actually how faithful it wants to be, and how specific, and the exact like Buddhist deep cuts it wants to have with very specific references just to the original Journey to the West. So you think the first season, yes, is aimed quite low at kids. The pacing is like ADHD toxic. Like I'm like, what in the Gen Alpha is this bullshit that my eyes are watching? It feels like I'm watching like what's it called? The blocks, the jumping puzzles, you know, all that ADHD stuff that gets put on with internet reels. Anyway, the pacing of it was like giving me a migraine. It was very fast, very intense, very loud visuals. I'm like, this is actually a punch to the head. And it's also Lego, so I'm like, why are you making me watch this, housemate Dr. Bradley Gooding? But then we kept watching it. We watched season 2, and I'm like, okay, that was actually some really interesting character beats. I'm starting to care about these characters. That's actually very interesting. The other amazing thing is they have the English voice actor for Goku
What?
is Monkey King. And so now it's Monkey King's turn. It's this wonderful meta layer that he's now the mentor. So it's like we've all grown up with the voice of Goku, and now Goku's in the mentor seat training Monkey Kid. And that's very clever. And then by about season 4, I'm like, all right, I have to eat my words. This is actually amazing. It's doing some really intelligent context stuff where it's a Western lens, but it's very faithful to Journey to the West. And it's both referential and adding to the lore at the same time. Crazy feat. So yes, but it's also Lego. So it's crazy. Go check it out. After season 4, the animation style changes, and it actually made me really sad. And I'm like, I just gotten used to how amazing the ADHD Gen Alpha animation was, and then I'm like, oh, now they've pared it back. They've lost their budget. But the story and the voice acting is still quite superb. So, despite all signs
Wait.
not to, I do recommend
Hold,
Monkey
hold on, Ali.
Kid.
I feel
Lego's
compelled to
Monkey Kid.
ask. Just how many episodes have you watched?
Yes. There would be about, oh, they're not super long seasons, so there's maybe 10 episodes a season. So I've
And-
watched about 40 episodes of this thing, and they're quick. They're 15-minute episodes, but it's good lore, it's good shonen.
It sounds good.
And yeah, the character of Macaque is probably my favorite. Yeah, no, surprisingly good. I was happy to be wrong. So I guess circling back to surprisingly good, let's dive into Brandon Sanderson. I will point out to our listeners, but those watching on YouTube will see that I'm wearing some bright blue. I was inspired to put on my Shalon cosplay for this episode. I'm like, I actually, quite a few years ago, spent the time sewing 2 different dresses together.
do.
Matan, you'll appreciate that one of them's actually a safe hand. So
And
I'm
he does
trying to
love
like set up
buttons
my
on the
microphone.
side
I'm
for
like,
some
I
reason.
have to use. Yes, it's got like that, and I can lift up the front here because I actually went to the effort
pattern.
of drawing pattern on.
Before
So
we
pattern
before we
gets
get to
ride
discover his
around
true nature.
on Shalon's skirt.
Right.
No, he's very excellent nature. And as I was show and telling to Matan earlier, at the same convention I went to, I got to meet the man himself. So I've got myself a signed copy
I would-
of The Way of Kings.
That's
So
amazing.
that's the level of
That's
fandom
amazing.
we're talking about. But I'm happy to do the fun, like, let's critique to admire. Let's pull apart the craft and work out what makes him tick, what makes his work tick, and is he right for you to jump into if you're interested in your
James, we're
sci-fi
talking
and
to you, by the
fantasy,
way.
building your
This,
library.
this is directed at you. That's
Yes.
directed at you.
Oh, that's a direct.
Yes. So before we talk about the content of his work, Matan, he brought this up, and I thought this was very excellent to do. But talking about perhaps how we first learned of him, and then we can talk a bit more about what we
Right.
know of him and his writing practice, how he got started, and his role now in the writing community. Because you had some
Oh,
very excellent
thank you.
things to say, Matan, about his early journey meant to you as you
I
were
think
following
Sanderson is a very
along.
interesting figure. In a sense, he's a conflicting figure because, on the one hand, he's this incredibly industrious, prolific writer that if you kind of follow him, it can be overwhelming because this person can surprise publish 2 books at the end of the year that nobody even knew about. And he has this insane timeline where these huge, massive Game of Thrones length books just come out on time and pretty fast. So, on the one hand, if you're a writer, Sanderson can be this intimidating Goliath that kind of makes you feel like you're not worthy. Yeah, exactly. Ali's holding just to demonstrate just how big his books are.
And I brought a banana for
Yeah.
scale. So if that's
A normal book.
a normal book,
And I think that
and then
sometimes
Wind
as a
of
writer,
Truth.
as frustrated as we can be with Patrick Rothfuss and George R. R. Martin, there's something comforting about their struggles to finish books on time because it makes us feel like they are human and therefore we, the humans, could also possibly be among them one day. Sanderson is not like that. Sanderson is, if a writer was made in a lab, that would be Sanderson, at least in terms of his work output. With that being said, he's also, to me, he's one of the writers that kind of gave me motivation because he has experienced a lot of failure early on. He did not just, you hear about writers that wrote their first book in a month and now they're a New York Times bestseller. Sanderson, he went through the path of failure of writing a lot of books. If I'm not mistaken, and Ali, correct me if I'm mistaken, Sanderson has actually written a lot of books before he got published. He wrote, I believe, more than 10 books without a single one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I looked it up. It was
imagine
13. He wrote
that.
13 books
Imagine
before he
writing
was
book
published. Yep.
number 9 and book 1 through 8 is not published. That's incredible. And the first book that did get published to my memory was Elantris. I think Tor published it. It took them a year and a half to get back to him, or something of that magnitude. And so Sanderson is this polarizing figure to me. On the one hand, he's like this shonen-esque, number one ranked fantasy author that just makes everybody look like they're chumps. But if you really deep dive into his journey, it does really fill you up with hope. Because if one of the biggest names, maybe ever, in commercial fantasy, has gone through something like this, then all
Getting
of
there.
us could. And it doesn't matter how many books you have to write until they get published. Um, Sanderson wrote 13, so what's your excuse?
It's very interesting going like following his trajectory. And so I guess it's trying to, I think I've talked about this before, but dispelling the myth of yes, he's pumping out an extreme amount of books, but I like to look at him and his, let's say his one book a year. He kind of ruined that with his
Ruined.
surprise, I've written 4 books this year. But
Yeah.
typically he's a one book a year writer. And there's I'm just going to say it, like romantasy authors out there who are doing 2 books a year, and they're churning them out, and they can make a living as self-published because they're going for that quantity over quality. What I really admire about Branderson is that you can track his trajectory of the
Right.
quality's actually improving. So he's not just doing it for the I'm a pulp author churning out book after book to make a living, but there is this, he himself is motivated to improve his craft, to be the best he can, while also working at an insane rate. And to also demystify his quote unquote working at an insane rate, he's stepping more and more away from traditional publishing, and that now you could almost call him a hybrid author. He'll still release, say, his big Stormlight books come out through trade publishing, through Tor. But Dragonsteel, his own company that he's been nurturing for a good 10 years, he is self-publishing, say, the leather-bound versions of his books. So he'll do a crowdfunding for that. People are like, hell yeah, I'll pay $200 for a leather-bound copy of Oathbringer. And then it's his personal company that is delivering those. And the more Dragonsteel's been building, the more risks those are taking, the more and then essentially his secret projects, his surprise big 4, his surprise 4 books he wrote in a year, those were technically self-published through Dragonsteel, and then I think were later picked up and went through traditional channels. But within this machine he's building, he has teams of beta readers, teams of gamma readers, and he shares that I think a lot of authors hide behind the scenes how much work how many other people are involved in a book's editorial. Amongst ourselves at Precipice, we know how much we're involved in each other's editorial, but there's almost like this game of once a book's on a shelf, it's a single name on the cover. This one person did it all. But I've always admired that Branderson he includes pages and he will include everyone's name who is involved in the reading pools. So he will, my God, it absolutely rattled me, like in a good way, I guess, but I was shocked to my core when he said for Wind and Truth, he had 3 different endings that he'd written, and then he sent them out simultaneously to his different reading groups, waited for all the feedback to come in, and then he goes, then I waited through all the feedback and wrote a 4th ending, which is the true ending that's been published. So we're talking about just this machine work of just feedback, beta reading, applying notes, editorial that's just been honed over years. So it isn't, that's what I wanted to dispel about what a crazy man who's just writing nonstop. But yes, but what a crazy man who is like industrialized the editorial process very, very well. So he can keep his high standard of writing and keep pace at
I think another point
silly
is that
publication pace.
I once heard in an interview, I think by the people who are in the writing group with him, is that they would say there is a tremendous discrepancy between the quality of what he initially pumps out and the final product. And I think that that lack of inhibition to like, okay, I'm just going to write something and something's going to be on the page and I trust my process. I trust my process to get it where it needs to go. I think that also enables him to write at a very good rate because he's not worried about like, you guys know authors without or writers without naming names who just happen to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. I think Patrick Rothfuss in an interview was asked once, hey, why did it take you 14 years to get Name of the Wind out? And he said, it's not that I was fixing commas and improving vocabulary for 14 years. It's not the same book. I think he said in an interview that's probably 75% of the book has been changed over time. So it's just you write and rewrite and write and rewrite and rewrite. And maybe Sanderson, what he does, he just says, this is the story. These are the bones of the story. I'm confident in them. Now let's put it into the machine.
I think, and while you were saying that, it made me realize he's obviously an unapologetic planner as well. So where we have our George R. Martins and our Rothfusses, unfortunately they're going to get thrown under the bus for comparisons
We love
here.
you guys.
They're both self-confessed like they're pantsers. They're gardeners. They find and they prune it as they go. Brandon Sanderson is a spreadsheet guy through and through. But he's been honest about, yes, I have had my 10-book series plotted out from the beginning, but talks about, he's also then quite receptive to feedback. It changes along the way. I believe I haven't read it, but he's released a book called Way of Kings Prime. So that is, he's released the Way of Kings.
What do you mean Way of Kings Prime?
Have you heard of this, Matan?
What?
Oh, okay. No, so this is the official, canon story, Way of Kings. But he, through Dragonsteel, released Way of Kings Prime, and he goes, this was the version of the story as it was 10 years ago. He's like, before I decided to change it, he's like, this one's just for the fans, and have a read, see how different it is, how I changed my mind on all these. It's like he let his fans glance through the looking glass at this alternate reality of how the plot may have gone, and you kind of recognize some characters but not others. So that Way of Kings Prime exists if you want to go out and read it, but it's not canon. It's like an alternate version of Way of Kings. It's his early draft, and people have bought like leather-bound versions of this.
He's such a businessman. He's just releasing drafts at this point.
He's releasing drafts. It's a genius move.
Imagine if I don't know, Calvin Klein came out with like, here's half a shirt. It's not done yet, but this is what our shirt looked like at the beginning.
It's the early prototype of a shirt.
It doesn't have sleeves.
This is what it could have been like. Doesn't smell as good and it burned your skin, but imagine.
No, he mastered. He basically mastered the industry, I think, in a way that no one has from our genre, from the speculative fiction.
So and I think if I had to speculate why, it's because he's a fan at heart. I think he grew up in fandoms as a big fan, he knows how fans interact with the things they love and what they want from them. And so, yes, what a marvelous businessman who's exploited this, but look, I'll go out on a limb and say that it feels very genuine. It reads as very genuine, that he's like almost geeking out about it as much as all the fans are, and they're willing to go on that ride with him. And for those who don't know the context around Brandon Sanderson, it would have been 2 to 3 years ago now, but he holds the record for the largest Kickstarter in history. And a lot of people hadn't heard of him before this, because there's like all these news headlines about this outrageous number that he was able to raise through Kickstarter for his 4 secret projects. And they're like, who's this author? Who's this abstract author we've never heard of, who's raised millions of dollars? I'm going to have to look up the exact figure for this podcast. But yes, largest Kickstarter ever was for this 4 secret book project. And if you were already in the fandom at that point, you go, yeah, no, sounds right. That's checks out. He announces 4 new books that are Cosmere books. Yes, everyone's got to throw all of their money at him, but it kind of took the world by storm a little bit. It made them sit up and be like, who has this fandom at their control? And I think he just genuinely does understand
Right.
and has a lot of respect for his audience. Just a fun little anecdote again from when I met him. I wasn't fully
Not fully converted
into the
yet.
Cosmere when I first met him. He was there, he was signing, I knew of him, so I lined up, I got the book signed, and he asks every single person, do you have a question for me? And at the time, I'm just kind of like, no questions. Thanks for being here. Thumbs up. Love what you're doing. Keep going. It was only later I discovered what that moment is allowing each fan, okay, you have your one hyperfixation question you want to ask about a deep lore cut of a magic system.
Is Shallan going to get with Kaladin?
Ask me.
What's going to happen?
Well, deeper than that, it's kind of like, is this person actually going to turn out to be that person? Blah, blah. Yeah. So what he does is he has cards in his pockets that have, I think it's ROFO, RAFO, and no, that can't be it. Read RTFO. So if you manage to ask a question that's correct, essentially meant to speculate at him, you're like, is this what's going to happen in the plot? And if you guess correctly, he gives you a read to find out card, because that's his card of, I can't answer that out loud because that's a spoiler, but it's almost like you've won the game of interacting with Brandon Sanderson if he gives you a read to find out card. I think Robert Jordan may have started this, so we can't quite credit Brandon Sanderson with starting this, but obviously he took up the mantle of finishing the Wheel of Time after Robert Jordan died. So he's then also taken up this mantle of read to find out.
Have you watched the anime Hikaru no Go?
The fandom.
So the anime Hikaru no Go is this, you know, the game Go, like the Chinese game. So this 12-year-old kid basically is visited by the ghost of a grandmaster Go player that was executed by the emperor. He was the emperor's teacher, and then he goes into competitions and he kicks ass. And basically the ghost whispers in his ears what moves to play. What if Robert Jordan's ghost is basically telling Brandon Sanderson what to write? I said it.
Well, the hot take I'll have is Brandon Sanderson's plots being far more coherent and finished than Robert Jordan's ever were.
Maybe he learned from his mistakes.
But I think that just goes to show what a wonder. He knows he's going to get a lot of, like, lack of a better word, geeks, nerds who just want to ask their one really intricate question when they get him in person. So he's made a game of it, a challenge of it, of ask a question, see if it's something I can answer on the spot, or have you stumbled your way into a spoiler successfully? Here's the read to find out card. So yes, in hindsight, I'm really disappointed that I'm like, oh, that's what he was actually asking me. He opened the gates of, is there anything
you would like to
ask me? I didn't know the game at the time. And Other
So
things,
we've spoken a lot about like his craft and then his business side and his kind of personal thing, but I'm interested to know about the stories and like what is
yes,
it about the actual books that like really
I
gets
do
like what has created
absolutely.
this fandom.
Yes. All right, let's get there. One other, yes, before we talked about the reading order, I did just want to quickly touch on if you guys want to hear about him speak about his own craft, um, from himself, look up the podcast Writing Excuses. That's really where I got into not just his stuff, but learning about him and what he teaches, and how he talks about craft and fantasy, and how he is really dedicated to elevating craft. And the fact that he comes from this place of wanting to knowledge share as well, I think it's all about raising writers up,
Yep.
raising the sector up. He's really genuine in that knowledge share. And on YouTube, you can also find free lectures he gives.
Yeah.
Um, at I think it's the BYU University. So he delivers a fantasy and sci-fi course there. It's all recorded. It's all up on YouTube. So that's kind of all part of his philosophy of just knowledge sharing, writing craft, skilling everyone up. This isn't something that should be hidden. So he's very generous in that. But I also think you'll peel back the lid if you do go and watch it and realize that I've just been bullshitting my whole time. And any bit of writing wisdom I've ever given anyone, it's actually come through the prison of stuff I've learned from Brandon Sanderson first and just to regurgitate it
Um,
back.
I think would be a good time, like as we are going to start discussing the content of the stories, to also
Yeah.
introduce a little of
Yes.
controversy into this very glowing podcast so far, which is if Sanderson is so amazing, why do some people not necessarily know who he is? Maybe outside of this club of very avid Sanderson fans. What are the problems with Sanderson? Why is it that he isn't quite yet the undisputed king of modern fantasy? Maybe he is. Maybe this conversation is already irrelevant, but um, I think that
No, it's a good
in a
question.
sense,
Um,
I think Stephen King once said of his writing that it's like having a cheeseburger. Um, it's good, it's simple, it works. He doesn't try to argue that it's like, the most amazing prose ever written. And I think in a sense, sometimes the prose in Sanderson's books is not very even. And one thing that Ali brought up is the fact that he got better is kind of shocking because you wouldn't expect someone to get better after so many books. But I think Stormlight Archives, James, is, in my opinion, the first A-tier writing book that Sanderson published in terms of the writing. The writing itself, I find to be on a different level than, let's say, the Mistborn trilogy, which I love. But Mistborn trilogy, which is, I was introduced to
mm,
Sanderson. My first book was The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, which I loved immediately. It has a very cool magic system. He has some of the best magic systems in the genre. And but as I was reading, I'm like, this is really fun, but I'm kind of feeling like I'm reading a Jack Reacher novel in some sense, in that the prose is functional,
mm,
the story is amazing, the planning is amazing, the magic, it was like reading shonen as a book. I loved it, especially growing up on
yes.
Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, Naruto, all that stuff. I absolutely loved it. But if I put it side by side by other fantasy authors that I liked, I sometimes felt like he's just trying to get his
Mm,
story across. He doesn't really try to go deep. And then Stormlight Archives came, and everything felt like it had leveled up to me in terms of the prose. It suddenly, which is crazy because these books are so big, so you wouldn't expect it to be that way. But I think that's the gripe some people have with him. Especially, I felt it in the third book of the Mistborn trilogy. It's called The Hero of Ages, where
mm,
sometimes there would be a very long
yep.
conversation and speech tags would be repeated. Like a character would talk for a while, say, and raise the glass of wine. 2 pages later, the same character would raise a glass of wine while talking. And that almost felt kind of lazy. Like someone's like, yeah, you're not here for the speech tags. You're here to see how this ends. And in a sense, he's right. But in a sense, there's another aspect of literature that I think sometimes some of his books were kind of lacking in, if that makes sense.
Mm, yep. No, I 100% agree. The phenomenon of Brandon Sanderson's incredible
Okay, you
because
said it
he's a
very
terrible
differently.
whaiter. And that's why
I do
it's
all
so
these spiel trying
fascinating.
to be
You said
diplomatic
it's
about
so
it. And, yeah, he
kind.
sucks.
Yeah.
The writing's not that good. Like if we're just judging like line editing standard writing, even Wind and Truth. So when we're discussing content, we won't do any spoilers for Wind and Truth because I haven't actually finished it yet. But so I've had like a year of reading other books, waiting for Wind and Truth to come out. Very excited, Wind and Truth, start reading it, and I'm like, all right. Like I had to like lower my standard and be like, all right, we're back at Brandon Sanderson level prose. I had been spoiled by a buffet of excellent writing in the one not reading Brandon Sanderson. But then I've come back and I just had to like lower the bar. But then once I'm in it, the joy of it is the characters are phenomenal characters. Some of my dearest fictional characters will have to be from Stormlight Archive. The way he weaves themes and the philosophy in his books is all incredible and of the highest standard with any other spec fic we could recommend. It's just the prose themselves are just
Yeah.
workhorse words on a page, doing the bare basics they need to do to communicate story. And it's fascinating that it's such a contrast. Normally, when a writer elevates in their theme and character and everything else, like the prose does elevate as well. And it's interesting you should say that about the Stormlight Archive, Matan, because if you think that's like the best he's doing, and then I'm reading Stormlight
Okay,
5 and I'm still like,
Stormlight 1,
I might
Stormlight
struggle to
1,
go
I
back and watch
felt received.
Stormlight 1.
He realized Stormlight
Yeah.
is James. It's part of his 10 book plan, 10 books, and when Sanderson says he planned 10 books, I believe
It's
him.
the big one.
I felt like he
Yes.
really put everything into it, and Stormlight is basically it cannibalized ideas and scenes and characters that Sanderson has been keeping with him for years. It actually
Yes.
started as a novel aptly named Dragonsteel, the same company that the name of his company. So it's always been close to his heart that he's been trying to write forever. And so when he got to Stormlight, he took entire
Mm.
sections, character arcs, and basically cannibalized them into this new book, the Stormlight Archives. And I felt like the question is this, and this is the dramatic question I wanted to ask ever since we announced this podcast. Is there a version of Sanderson that prioritizes lasting literary significance over output and basically has books that survive in the canon forever? Because Sanderson is the biggest name right now. He's been the biggest name forever. But 30 years
Interesting.
from
How
now,
long will he
like,
stick
yeah, he's
around
churning hits,
after
you know, like
that?
these
Yeah.
singers. Like, I'm not going to compare him to Katy Perry, but some people are like at the top of the chart. But
No, but he's
right,
the
he
Marvel
is.
Cinematic Universe
And
of
and
books
we
at the
still
minute.
don't know how the
Yeah.
Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to age. At the time, it's absolute dominance.
When it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's bad. Look, no, look, there's definitely worse Marvel movies than the
Would
worst
you
Brandon Sanderson books.
would
I
you
would
prefer to
happily
have
go
less
on record
books
saying that.
and to have more? Or are you like, no, this is exactly what I want. I want this amazing world building, amazing characters. I
Of
will
the
not
Cosmere.
sacrifice quantity.
Yeah, no, for me, the Cosmere. Yeah, its joy is in its volume, and I don't think many other authors have successfully done that. And this will be the perfect time to dive into my recommended reading order now, and
What's
this will be our chance to be like
yeah,
the content of this book and what it's about. But he so successfully weaves. You
shared
need to
universe.
read this book to understand this book, to understand in an exciting way, not in like a homework, oh, I've got to go away, but it's like the joy I have found from picking up on that as being a crucial part of that book. Like The Matrix is so rewarding as a fan as you piece it together yourself. It's almost like a gamified interactivity of your story building because you have to be across all these different books to make it work. Or they do work on their own, but there's just
Hmm.
an extra meta story to revel in if you do go for the full Cosmere. Um, And I just haven't seen another author do that well. So
Could I
let's
ask,
go.
would you say the way he writes fantasy, is it like how does it exist within the genre? Is he kind of changing it? Is he pushing it? Is it progressing it? Is it new things, or is he kind of doing not that this is any less, but is he doing what is generally expected within
Yeah,
the
that's
fantasy
such a
genre
good
and just
question.
doing it very well?
So I with Matan, I don't think it's an episode we've released yet, but when we did the deep dive into fantasy or however we pitched that episode, Brandon Sanderson's for work really helped me work out that if sci-fi, say, is asking the what if of philosophies and technologies, then so it's like, then what does fantasy do? What is fantasy's role in this space? And for me, it's the what if of mythologies and religion. That
Mhm.
fantasy is such an incredible tool for unpacking those thoughts and themes. So it's almost for me, that's where I split the hairs between is it sci-fi, is it fantasy? Well, is it dealing with philosophy and technology? It's a sci-fi. Is it dealing with religion and myth? It's a fantasy. And what Brandonson is actually
Mm.
pushing ahead and doing what other authors aren't doing, and what he may be remembered for is his unpacking of religion. And Matan, when you brought up before why some people might be put off from reading Branderson, they may be aware that he is a dedicated and a loud and proud Mormon. And a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, he's a Mormon. And I don't know, do I want to be reading that? Is that
Yeah,
going to
is
be
he trying
some
to
weird,
subvert my?
preachy, um, religious work? Yeah, that I don't want to read. But then what he does is you're getting in, yes, you do get characters who are religious of the fake magic system religion, and you get to understand why they have their faith in that magic system and what it means to them. And then the trials that cause them to question their faith or completely abandon their faith, compared with here's another equally well-written character who's a complete
Right.
atheist. They are a scientist. They think religion is bogus, and the plot will neither choose one of these characters as right or wrong. You wouldn't know from, you could probably get a sense that if you knew nothing about him, but you just read his work, you would probably walk away with the sense that this person was clearly raised religious in religious systems, but you'd probably never actually be able to peg down what their take on religion is, because there'll be so many different characters with different, well-rounded, believable
I
takes on religion. And in Stormlight in particular, I think it's doing such a great job of that in the character of Dalinar, who is
I wish he was my
essentially
father,
starting his own religion.
Dallin. I wish he was my
Yeah,
father.
Daddy
At least my
Dalinar.
mentor.
Um, but it's going to the effort of you get quotes from the in-world, I'll just call it a Bible that this character is writing. So Brandon Sanderson's writing like a meta Bible with quotes, what am I trying to say? Like parables, words of wisdom that would read like it was a religious text. But it's Dalinar, his in-world character, writing this religious text. And that's just there's fascinating layers to unpack there. And at no point as a reader do you feel like you're being preached at, because it is just so soundly woven into this is this world's mythos and couldn't exist outside of this context. It can
I
only exist within this magic system. So it's
I
very
think Ali's
clever and
absolutely
I
right,
admire
and
it
I
for
liked
that.
how you brought up what we mentioned in the deeper fantasy dive about fantasy being a what if of mythology. But I also think that one thing that Sanderson has done with the fantasy genre is that he has remodeled it for the new millennium fans. What does that mean? Because if you published a fantasy book in the early 2000s, for example, Aragon, you basically you're catering to people who have grown up on Tolkien. You're catering to people who are expecting knights, dragons, and you can kind of push the genre a little bit. Like a talking dragon slash Pokemon is probably something that Tolkien wouldn't have written, but then you have it in Paolini's writing. But now you have these books that Sanderson writes that I feel like they are catered to an audience that is familiar with the Eastern influences, with the Japanese, with the journey of the West. For journey into the West, they are influenced by it, and therefore the action and the magic system are far less grounded than almost anything fantasy had to offer before. Even if you compare it to Hi Rothfuss, welcome back to the conversation. Even if you compare it to The Name of the Wind, The Name of the Wind has a very grounded, hyper realistic magic system to the point that when someone jumps off a roof and doesn't break their leg, it's considered an amazing, incredible feat. On the other hand, the Starlight Archives begin with basically someone soloing an entire castle with gravity powers, a magic sword that sucks out people's soul, and have a battle that could have been the final boss in Final Fantasy. That's how Stormlight Archives begin, with this extremely ungrounded fantasy action. And I feel like these kind of books would have not been possible without the Eastern influences, the manga, the anime, even comic books in a sense. So I think what he did is he approached this audience in a way that they haven't been approached yet in a book. And he tapped into something that was untapped until then.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I think contemporary fantasy, I think Brandon Sanderson. He did it. You don't immediately think of Tolkien when you're reading his stuff. It's almost as if Tolkien isn't an influence, and what a feat
Fantasy.
in of itself to be like,
Yeah.
I'm unmistakably writing fantasy, but you can't see any Tolkien in my work. In saying what you just said though, Matan, he is known for his hard magic systems. I think we've got a whole episode on soft versus hard, and the idea that if a hard magic system has rules, you as a reader can know exactly how this works. He's all over that. It's not your like Studio Ghibli soft magic systems. This is both. It can have its ethereal, religious, unknowable aspects, but then there's the real world magic. We know exactly how a character can interact with it. So he likes giving the rules so you can play with. To the point, he is a gamer. He's written a lot of games. So I think that's why he likes
Yeah.
being hard in his rule sets as well, because I think he just gets a kick out of he plays Magic the Gathering. He's like, we need the rules, we need the mechanics, we need to know how this works. All right, I think it is time to dive through his bookography. There's a better bibliography book. No, I'm going to call it a bookography. So Matan, as I dive through these, I want you to like tell James what you remember from this book. What are your standout features of likes or dislikes from each of these books?
Right.
All right, here we go. Elantris is my first in the recommended reading order.
Anything, but I will say that it's like this the firstborn forgotten daughter in a sense that was completely overshadowed by things that came later. But then I think a lot of real Sanderson fans would find a lot of joy in going back and trying to like, what is the place of this novel in the Cosmere? Where does it belong? How it is part of the bigger whole? It's like people going back to watch, I don't know, the first Thor to see if there's any Hela references.
If they were smart enough to put Hela references in the first Thor, which I don't think they did. The reason the Elantris, there's only one book. It's a standalone. It's not his best writing, but it's accessible in that you're like, oh, I don't want to start with a trilogy. You can start with Elantris. It's standalone, but the Elantris magic system goes on to be referenced later and is very important.
Opened the door
so
for
it's
him.
like
So
good
it has
to
a
know
lot
your
of,
way around the Elantris magic.
Personal significance for the Sanderson enterprise.
It's got the character of Herathan, who to this day still lives a little rent-free in my mind. He's like Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame. Imagine like this religious zealot, sexual deviant with bone magic powers on the front lines who can't be stopped. He's such an incredible villain who goes on an amazing arc, again, with his journey with his religion. He's a religious zealot. He's the villain. And it's excellent, and the magic system is fascinating. You get a city full of zombies.
You made me think of the bishop.
And main character's love interest becomes a zombie, and that's
you made
the
me think
problem
of the
they're trying to
bishop
solve.
from the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes, yeah,
yeah.
That's him. Yep, that's Herathan. Love Herathan. But yeah, if he was punchy, I've heard people speculate that Herathan is like an alpha version of Dalinar. It's like he wanted to write this character, see if he could test him, and then he came into his own, and then he wrote him as a protagonist later, and you get Dalinar. Then I would recommend stepping sideways to a short story called The Emperor's Soul, if you like side quests. Again, mainly because its magic system is going to show up later, so if you want to have that awesome aha moment, you want to be across the Emperor's Soul. It is set on the same planet as Elantris. This is what you need to know, kids, about the Cosmere. We're literally talking about a galaxy, so different stories happen on different planets. So that's a very like sci-fi approach to how this galaxy's working. So I'm going to say it happens on the Elantris planet, but it's on a different continent. So again, different continents sometimes have different magic systems. It's good and complicated. It's great. Don't be scared, kids. You'll love it. So The Emperor's Soul, a great short story of a woman, from what I remember.
I have not.
Have you read The Emperor's Soul, Matan? No, so she's was like a scientist in this world. She's been trapped in a cell, and they're like, our emperor's
shit.
dead. You got to bring him back from the dead. And she's like, that's not possible. And they're like, do it anyway, or you're locked in this cell forever. So that's my pitch for The Emperor's Soul. I would then recommend the
That's the one.
Mistborn trilogy, which is The Final Empire, The Well of Ascension, Hero of Ages. Matan, tell us what is good about
Mistborn is the book
Mistborn.
I kept ignoring on bookshelves in bookstores for ages because I kept seeing Sanderson, Sanderson, Sanderson. Finally, I just cracked and I got the damn thing. Super, super, super readable. Page flipper as hell. Characters that are interesting. I don't want to spoil, but you have this dual protagonist thing, and something happens 2/3 of the way throughout the book that now we might know how to expect. But when this book came out and was young and fresh, was kind of shocking in a good and unexpected way. A nice cast of characters. Again, don't expect
Good twists.
Rutfuss level writing. But it really goes along. It's what I like about the story is the shape. It's almost a heist movie in a sense because they gather the team. They're gonna take down the empire. The book is called The Final Empire. The one at the top of the Final Empire is freaking evil Jesus, and there's something about the unlikability, the unlikely odds of success that makes it super exciting. Forget the fact that there are 6, 7, 8, 20, 100 books to come later. Enjoy the book for what it is because it has this really nice shape as, dare I say, a book that can be enjoyed alone. Even if you do not read its successors, it's a great story. Don't be intimidated.
Most
Read
of
The
them
Final
can,
Empire, and I
is it
have a
not?
feeling you will want to continue to read at least the next two after finishing it.
And I'll add to that, the magic system for this is we're talking metals. People drink metals and then they get powers from drinking metals. So they can push, they can pull things, they shoot through the air, they can fire coins at each other like
It's like
snipers.
Magneto's powers if it
cool
was
shit.
divided into 100 subsections, basically.
Yes, yes. You got to collect them all like Pokemon. And also, Brandon Sanderson is famous for not being good at writing romance.
He refuses.
A lot of characters are in a lot of relationships, and well, not he tries. It's like if your like awkward dad tried to tell you about like a love he had when he was a kid, and you're like, oh, that's cute, but also no details. It's fine. So he has this quirky relation. He writes a lot of couples and power couples. So I love that. He's like, rather than focusing on like the falling in love and the sex, it's just like, we're an awesome team. We're married and marriage is great. Read into that as you will, but he's really good at writing that beat. My favorite couple probably in the entire Cosmere, if I don't get my power thruple of Adel and Shalon and Kaladin, which I probably won't get that. That's the dream throuple. But if we don't have that, I settle for Vin and Elend from the Mistborn trilogy. Actually, that's probably one of the few courtship plots.
They're reading books and ignoring each other, and it's very High School Musical
That's
level.
That's the best way to write a
romance,
courting story.
And they're the only people the same age that are in a room together. I don't know.
Oh, well, you can tell me your favorite couple when we come across it then, Matan, if you don't like Vin and Elend.
I didn't like the love triangle in the second book. It was very forced for me. What the?
It got me going to the point where I'm like, I hate Zayn so much.
Anyway, sorry. Twilight level writing.
Yes, I think that was his go at trying to
Time
write
to
a
try.
triangle, and it was weird. Okay, moving on.
Do love triangles ever work, or is it just
Just a
it's just a
device.
dynamic that people throw into stories to get a bit of
Yeah,
conflict and
he
tension? Yeah.
was. He's been guilty of that twice.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he's.
But
Well, at least Brandon Sanderson has never successfully written a
Oh,
triangle that I've. Again, the Kaladin Shalon Adolin, I'm like, there's a clear solve that they all need to fuck each other. It just needs to be a thruple and everyone's happy. The 11th Medal is a short story that is directly tied to the original Mistborn trilogy. So once you've read it, it's actually a prequel, but the reason I'm recommending reading it after is kind of if you've fallen in love with the characters, you like the characters, you want more of the characters, that's the right time to get the prequel context of the 11th Medal. So read that. And then big old spoiler button on be very careful, but this is when you read the short story Secret History. Only once you've finished Mistborn Era 1, after you've finished The Hero of Ages,
right.
then read Secret History. In terms of game-changing stories for the entire Cosmere, Secret History changes everything. So this is the right time to read it. Be ready. Don't read spoilers before you get to this short story. Have a good time. I would then recommend it is now time to read Mistborn Era 2. The books in Era 2 are The Ally of Law, Shadows of Self, Bands of
Basically, the
Mourning.
Legend of Korra version of the Mistborn trilogy. We're jumping ahead in time. How many? 200, 300 years?
We jump ahead about
I think more.
100
Surely
years.
more.
Is that right? Um,
Feels like more.
yeah, I don't know. Without spoilers, because magic systems, some characters we are familiar with are still around 100 years later. Not all. We otherwise have a new cast of protagonists who are all equally good and amazing. And Era 2 is lovely. And I don't want to speak for Nathan, but I think outside of the Stormlight Archive, he likes Mistborn Era 2 the
Yep.
most. So it's more of the same, but updated and Western. If you wanted like fantasy
I think the
Western, you're going
reason
to love it
that
here.
that trilogy works is that it was done after 3 books of the original Mistborn, and people got their satisfaction with the original trilogy. So they were like, okay, we're going somewhere else now. It almost reminds me of, again, The Legend of Korra is the first thing that jumps to my mind. We're jumping ahead. We're taking remnants of that old magic system and like, what if there are guns? What if we're, it, but like,
And now they're
it's
guns.
like the biggest what if. What if this clash of magic and technology, in a way that originally when you write magic systems, you kind of want them to replace technology. You don't want them to be, because fireballs are not that cool if the other guy has a sniper rifle. And I think
There's another short story after the Mistborn Era 2. Go and read Sixth of the Dusk. Have you read this one, Matan?
no, I have not. The sixth
So
of the
this is
dusk.
part of, he released a collection of short stories called Arcanum Unbound. So if you're like, where do I find these short stories? You find them in this collection. This one is set on a new planet. So this is a new, you're going to jump somewhere else. This is the only story set on this planet, but it has Mistborn references and it will go on to be important for the Stormlight Archive. So that's why I recommend reading it now. Its magic system, spoiler, is birds. The birds are magic. It's great. We then move on to Warbreaker is the one I would recommend next. Have you read Warbreaker, Matan?
I have not, but apparently it's got magic system with colors.
Colors, yes. So Warbreaker is a standalone, so very accessible. And for lack of a better word, if I needed to get someone into the Cosmere who had mainly been reading I don't know, romance books, lighter YA books, I'd be like, start with Warbreaker. The main plot is a woman is set up for an arranged marriage, and he's like the god emperor of the world, and she's like this, and she's not religious. Like she's not a part of, she doesn't worship him. She's from a different religion, and she's picked to be forced to marry the god emperor. And then her sister equally decides to start a war and is excellent. So that's the plot of Warbreaker. Their magic system is breaths. While the plot of Warbreaker is just standalone, the magic system from this planet, again, has incredibly powerful consequences for Stormlight. So it's good to be across the Warbreaker context before starting um, Stormlight Archive. Then I would recommend stepping sideways. Brandon Sanderson has written 3 comics called they're the White Sand. So it's White Sand 1, White Sand 2, White Sand 3. Go and grab those. They're self-confessed, they're not his best. And the reason they're released as comics is because he wrote them as novels, and he's like, they must have been one of his early like trunk novels. And he's like, I don't know if I've pulled off White Sands. Don't know if I love it. But he sold the rights to like an artist who's like, I would love to turn this into a comic. So the White Sand story exists as comic books. There's also like audiobook versions that are like those movie for your ears that they do with sound effects and stuff, a teleplay. So those are available to get yourself across White Sand. Again, there's a few characters who are world hoppers. Literally, that's what they're called. They go to the different planets. These characters are fun to follow. So if you want to get your head across like the origin story of some world hoppers, by this point, you may want to. White Sand is the place to do that. White Sand magic system also has a little bit of relevance for Warbreaker and Stormlight. All right. As I've been hinting at, as Matan has been saying, the Stormlight Archive is the centerpiece of this. It's literally the centerpiece of his world. Everything else almost exists to give context to the magnum
Avengers movie,
opus.
basically.
Yes, it's the Avengers. It's on a new planet. It's on Roshar. Roshar has its several magic systems as well, which is explained deeply in the lore. It's essentially every time there's a god, there's a new magic system. Each god has its own magic system. Its religion manifests in a different way. Roshar has 3 gods, so that's good and complicated, leads to a lot of war, and has led to 3 different magic systems. So get yourselves across the Way of Kings, Words of Radiance. There's a short story called Edge Dancer. Get yourself across Oathbringer. There's a short story called Dawn Shard. Don't forget Dawn Shard, crazy important. Rhythm of War, which I will declare is probably my favorite book. Rhythm of War is basically fantasy Die Hard. I feel like everything Branderson has learned over his like decades of writing, he put into Rhythm of War. The 2 leads are Kaladin, who is best boy, and Navani, who's like this older woman scientist, and she's here to stop the war with science and like a breakthrough of the century, while Kaladin's just trying not to be too depressed, not to pick up his spear and fight. So balancing those 2 protagonists is excellent. And just released is Wind of Truth, which is Stormlight 5, which will wrap up
491,000 words. That's half a million words, give or take. It's like reading the Old Testament and the New Testament together, more or less.
I haven't gotten to the end yet, so I can't.
How is it so far, Ali?
So this is the funny thing. I'm kind of like, it's fine. I'm loving Adolin's plot. Adolin and Dalinar are so far the standouts for Wind of Truth. Kaladin is so funny because he's not doing anything, and that's the point of his character. And it keeps leaning into the nudge, nudge, wink, wink of Kaladin's like, I thought I'd be the protagonist, but I guess I'm choosing not to be the protagonist because of my mental health. And as a reader, you're just like, do something, Kaladin. But it doesn't seem to be his story. It's Adolin and Dalinar's story so far. I don't know where it's going, but as of yet, it's not better than Rhythm of War for me. I still love Rhythm of War more. So anyway, we might bring it home with some stupid fucking twists, which I'm anticipating. So I might still be about to experience all that. So that's the Stormlight. That'll end at book 5. He's then told us he's going to do a similar thing to Mistborn, where there's going to be a time skip, and then there will be a Stormlight Archive 2, where we're going to get 5 more books after a time skip. But it is going to end this arc for us.
You telling me that Wind and Truth will end that story, basically?
Yeah.
How have you not finished it? What do you mean?
It's very big, Matan. It's a very big book.
Okay, in Ali's defense, I stopped
Trying to
reading.
get through it as fast as I can.
I stopped reading
Okay.
after Oathbringer because life and stuff. I liked Oathbringer very much. Um,
Oathbringer is
uh,
good.
but yeah, I will get to it eventually.
Um, then for our listeners who are still very keen, there's still more books to go. I would say now's about the right time to jump sideways to there's a short story called The Shadows of Silence in the Forests of Hell. It's a lovely name. Essentially, Brandon Sanderson, he's like, I feel like writing a horror. He's like, I'll give horror a go. And this is his novella, Go at It. It's on a new planet. That planet's fucked. Very interesting because it's very different to all the other stuff, but it does immediately lean into the Sunlit Man, which feels a little like a sequel to the Stormlight Archives because one of the like B characters in the Stormlight Archives is now the lead of Sunlit Man. And that's very cool to see where they are post Stormlight 5. And we got to read that book before Stormlight 5. Very complicated. That's why I'm recommending you all read Stormlight 5, Wind and Truth, before Sunlit Man. Then you've also got Tress of the Emerald Sea. Go and spoil yourself with Tress of the Emerald Sea. We've done a good job of getting through this whole podcast without talking about Hoyd. Hoyd is
Wits.
yeah, you brought up Dragonsteel as a book before. Hoyd is essentially the character who appears in every book. So
He's
there are
the
other world hoppers, but Hoyd is the one who will be in all of them. If there is a spine and a continuation between all the books, it's this one character named Hoyd.
Imagine Stan Lee in Marvel movies, but if he actually had something to do and not just
Yeah, if
show
he
up
was
for
actually kind of secretly
if
pulling
he
the
was
strings.
significant to the plot, not just.
Yes. So and Dragonsteel was like his book, but then Branderson decided not to publish it, didn't like it. And he's like, maybe I'll write a Hoyd book one day. Tress is as close as we've gotten to that, in that Hoyd is not the main, but he's second, and he does get some POV chapters, which is very rare. But it's essentially Hoyd being insane after the events of Stormlight, so that's just a fun little it's a nice ease in book as well, but it does technically happen very late in the timeline. There is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, quite standalone, if not for the fact Hoyd is also here, and it's also very important that it happens post Stormlight.
Mm.
So that's it. I managed to list them all. Holy shit, folks. That's the Cosmere as it stands to date.
I just
And
want
it's
to. I think your list is incredible, and I think that it will be really helpful for people who are intimidated by the amount of books. But I also think we should advocate for people like if there's nothing wrong with just picking one of these books that sounded good to you and starting from there. I think that even though everything is connected, it is not like there's no gatekeeping, okay? You can start by reading even the Wayne and Wax series. Like you could start with book number 4 of the Mistborn technically, and you could still have a good time.
I
I mean,
wouldn't recommend it though.
you wouldn't recommend it, but you get my point. You could start with Stormlight Archives. You can start with Mistborn. You can start with Tresses of the Emerald
Tress of the
Sea.
Emerald Sea. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and many people have started there because again, it's kind of, for lack of a better word, marketed as a girl's book. So it's like, oh, I'm going to pick up this lighter reading novel, and it just happens to be Cosmere important.
yeah.
Yeah. In saying that, though, I think I started at Stormlight Archive Book
Really?
1. Yes,
What?
and it was it was very dry reading for the first half. I'll be very honest. It is. I do have a pretty high tolerance for fantasy, long slog fantasy. We're like, okay, big battle sequences, a lot of names to learn, a lot of armies to learn. I do have a high tolerance for that, but Stormlight Archive, the first half, oh, sorry, well, Way of Kings,
Yeah.
very slow. I pushed through and was rewarded by getting to the end of that book. By the time Adolin and Kaladin have their first scenes together, I'm like, all right, I'm in. This is good stuff. But so I don't recommend starting there, but it can be done. But if like big, heavy fantasies frightens you, yeah, you got to work your way up to Stormlight because it's big armies in that one. More so than even the other books, which are usually like a single protagonist with powers. Stormlight throws you into battlefronts and military mechanics.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast. You have been listening to Pros and Cons, a Precipice Fiction podcast. You've been listening to Pros and Cons, a Precipice Fiction podcast. You have been listening to Pros and Cons, a podcast by Precipice Fiction. You've been listening to Pros and Cons, a podcast by Precipice Fiction.